Tonight on the QCR Radio News.
All eyes on Oregon for the continued fight between the consumer and big corporations. Should genetically modified foods be labeled on packaging? Now from Carolyn and Karel.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. My name is Carolyn.
And I am Karel Lambrecht.
And this is QCR Radio News. Oregon heats up. The fight over genetically modified foods continues in Oregon State. The recent push towards labeling genetically modified foods came to vote on November 4th. Kegan has the story.
Thank you, Carolyn, and good evening, everyone. You hit the nail on the head. This is a really big issue. Currently, 64 different countries require mandatory labeling of GMOs or ban GMOs altogether. Here in North America, the public interest in GMO labeling skyrocketed as a result of Prop 37, a 2012 referendum on mandatory GMO labeling in California. The proposition was defeated with only 48.6% support, but interest in the issue has continued to escalate, and multiple states have tried to pass their own bills supporting GMO labeling ever since. Right now, 31 states have pending legislation in relation to GMO labeling, while only 2 states have legislation in place.
Now I'm sure you can hear the protesters behind me because
here in Oregon, this issue is even more pressing. The Oregon Mandatory Labeling of GMOs Initiative, also known as Measure 92, was placed in a statewide ballot on November 4th, 2014. The vote failed, but if it had been successful, the measure would have mandated the labeling of certain foodstuffs that were produced with or contained genetically modified organisms. Reporting from Portland, Oregon, I'm Kegan Turcotte, and now back to the studio.
Well, there you have it. From all of us here at QCR Radio News, thanks for joining us this evening. We now ask you to tune in to our next program called The Passionate Eye for a more in-depth look at this controversial issue.
There is a new movement against the use of genetically modified organisms and growing outrage about the lack of labeling for products North Americans eat every day. But what are GMOs and GE foods? GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, are organisms that have been genetically engineered to include microorganisms that are not naturally present, such as animals, viruses, and bacteria. Biotech companies can use extremely strange yet innovative combinations to enhance foods, to be more resistant to disease and environmental changes, resulting in increased harvest volumes. For example, biotech companies have recently put Arctic flounder fish cells into strawberries to produce strawberries that resist freezing temperatures more effectively. Human genes have been added to fish, and even pharmaceuticals like birth control can be put into corn to produce contraceptive corn.
At this moment, more than 70% of food products in grocery stores contain genetically engineered ingredients. The most common GE foods that are being used are cotton, corn, soy, and canola. Greenpeace calculated that in the United States, almost 76% of crops grown are genetically modified to resist insects and 85% to tolerate being sprayed with herbicides and insecticide. But why is there such widespread use of genetically modified organisms in food? The Massachusetts Institute of Technology suggests that the need for food production to become more efficient has accelerated the growth and acceptance of GMO products. The global population is expected to surpass 9 billion by 2050. Thus, food productions will need to drastically increase in order to satisfy this population surge. In the words of MIT editor David Rotman, biotech corps will have an essential role in assuring that there's enough to eat. Another support of GMO foods, noted by scientists, is the crop's ability to withstand climate change. Weather patterns and natural disasters are becoming more unpredictable and extreme. Products engineered to be resistant against these climate changes and other natural products like disease are more profitable and less risky for the farming industry.
But is the focus on profits overriding the concerns with genetically modified foods? Are big corporations silencing environmental activists and the scientific community? Today, we will give them a voice.
we are now going to take you to another of our reporters who has had the chance to talk with a farmer about GMOs.
Thanks, Kegan. My name's Carolyn Taylor, and I'm a reporter just outside of Portland, Oregon. And I'm here with Shari Sirkin, the owner of Dancing Roots Farm, here to speak to us about her opinion on GMO products. So, Shari, what do you think about GMO seeds?
There's nothing that they're genetically engineering that would be of any benefit to me or any of my customers. We grow really healthy crops, really healthy soil, really healthy food. There are too many unknowns. I think the technology is way too new.
Thanks for your insight, Shari. So, Kegan, despite Shari and other farmers' best interests at growing organic crops in Oregon, there's still the vast majority of products in grocery stores that are genetically modified. Back to you. Now we're going to take you to the Queen's School of Business. We've spoken to Professor Jacob Brouwer, an esteemed faculty member and expert in marketing, to shed some light on the marketing angle. What would happen if labeling was accepted in Oregon? How does that affect the supply chain in the food industry?
Thanks, Carolyn.
And now I'd like to welcome Queen's School of Business Assistant Professor of Marketing, Jacob Brouwer. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. The major questions that we'd like you to answer for us are whether or not you think that GMO products should be labeled, and how do you think consumers would react if labeling GMO ingredients was a mandatory condition on all food products?
I think this is a really tough question. I think it's going to be highly dependent. So, from the consumer psychology side of things, well, I guess let's go first. From the consumer protection and consumer information side of things, having a label of GMO ingredients is desirable, right? From a public policy perspective, that the general opinion in this space would be giving consumers more information, letting them make an informed decision is a positive thing, just like the nutrition labels that we see on packaging. A lot of those ingredients are there after years of lobbying and years of counter lobbying, in fact, to try to include these things that should matter to consumers. So from the purely consumer information perspective, I think that it is desirable to have this label there. If it's something that consumers seem to care about, then I think it's something that ought to be there.
Well, that all makes a lot of sense, but do you have any concerns in regards to GMO labeling?
The downside of this, and this is related to some of the positive effects that GMO ingredients can have, GMO products could have. Knowing how consumers respond to things, my concern with having a general GMO label is, what is the information that consumers are going to take away from seeing that GMO label? What does it actually mean? So, like USD or organic, for example, the label on products specifies a particular set of requirements that these things must be met for you to be able to label this thing as organic, versus there's a lower level for contains organic ingredients versus a lower level that contains for something else. So, how are we going to decide what labels are there? But on a more consumer psychology side, the risk is that consumers are going to respond to it in the way they respond to lots of other labels over time, which is they rely on heuristics. People don't really want to spend a lot of time reading nutrition labels. They don't really want to know necessarily what's in their product, at least not actively. When it comes to especially grocery, fast-moving consumer packaged goods, consumers rely on heuristics. And if this becomes one more thing like fat-free or diet or low-fat, green or organic or natural, people start to make their decision purely based on this. And my concern is that these opinions of consumers would result in them just denouncing all GMO products, not really being informed about it, and they would result in a situation where essentially there is no more money available for some of these varieties of plants, or the research that goes on to find things that could actually be beneficial, they might go away. Essentially that the market backlash against GMO would be sort of uninformed, and it would cause the market or the research dollars to dry up for things that may actually be beneficial to society or to some segment of society, in particular subsistence farmers, right? They're not the ones that are grabbing a package off the shelf and deciding whether or not GMO ingredients matter to them. They're worried about feeding the mouths of their children that are sitting in their home. I think where GMO product labels will matter is in Western Europe, is in North America, is in a handful of societies that are far enough up the food stability ladder that they don't really have to worry about having enough food. And they're making a decision between which food am I going to eat tonight, not am I going to eat tonight.
Thank you very much, Professor Brouwer. And now back to the studio for a bit more discussion on this interesting issue.
So America, now we ask you, given the environmental and health concerns, do you want to know if you are eating these GMO foods? Do you want to be aware if you are potentially causing animals harm? I can tell you, Caroline, that I definitely do. But do consumers know about the potential harm? There are no current labeling requirements for GMO foods. Caroline, can you expand on this?
Well, in 2007, President Barack Obama promised to make GMO labeling a priority.
Here's what I'll do as president. I'll immediately implement country of origin labeling because Americans should know where their food comes from. We'll let folks know whether their food has been genetically modified because Americans should know what they're buying.
Nevertheless, in 2014, there is no mandatory labeling of genetically engineered foods in Canada or the US. In 2004, Canada adopted the standard of voluntary labeling and advertising of foods that are and are not products of genetic engineering, established by the Standards Council of Canada. These guidelines include sample label declarations that are understandable and refrain from misleading customers. They also set standards for single and multi-ingredient foods.
But some labels do mislead consumers. In a recent survey of 1,000 Canadians, more than 60% believed that natural is synonym with does not contain GMO foods. Virtually all natural products tested, that did not claim to be organic, contain traces of GMOs. I have a bottle of naked juice here with me. Look at this label, Caroline. 100% juice, all natural. And even look at this. Non-GMO. Well, these juices contain genetically altered soy products. So PepsiCo had a large class action lawsuit over this.
Right, there's substantial information asymmetry. Manufacturers are aware if a product contains GM ingredients, but consumers are not. Free market economics assume that purchase decisions are made by well-informed consumers. It is clear that this voluntary labeling initiative is not sufficient for consumers' understanding. So who is inherently responsible? Health Canada and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the CFIA, carry joint responsibility for federal food labeling policies in Canada under the Food and Drug Act. Based on 3 major consultations, a set of guidelines were developed for the labeling of ingredients, but not including GMOs. They concluded that labels should be understandable, truthful, and not misleading. Secondly, they will permit voluntary positive and negative labeling, but this claim must not be misleading or deceptive, and the claim itself must be factual, like contains gluten or does not contain gluten. This voluntary labeling is permitted in order to provide consumers with information that is not related to the safety of the product. Lastly, and most importantly, mandatory labeling is required if there is a health or safety concern, such as allergens.
But no labeling exists. Consumers have limited knowledge about GMOs and their continued use in agriculture. Research has shown that approximately a quarter of USA population have not read or heard about biotechnology in food production before surveyed, and only 19% were aware that they had probably eaten GM food in their lifetime. A 2011 survey of Canadians by the BC Growers Association stated that 76% of the population thinks that the federal government does not give Canadians enough information about GM foods. An astounding 9% had not even heard GMO food existed. Consumers have the right to be informed. Consumers need to understand the ingredients and production processes that create the food they ingest.
Very interesting. Right, so we've got our reporter on the scene at Metro Shopping Centre in Kingston, Ontario, to find out what consumers really do know about genetically modified products. Thanks, Carolyn. I'm here in Metro Shopping Centre in Kingston, Ontario, here to speak with some local consumers to see if they really do know what is in the food that they're buying.
Catherine, I'd like you to tell me, do you eat genetically modified products?
No, not that I know of. I've heard to stay away from those, so.
What do you have in your basket today?
Well, I have Honey Nut Cheerios and almond milk. It's my favorite snack.
So did you know that General Mills Honey Nut Cheerios, they have sugar and cornstarch as the 2 of the top 3 ingredients, both highly likely to contain GMOs?
I had no idea.
So how do you feel about General Mills?
Well, I guess I'm probably going to continue to buy their cereal, but I might keep that in mind and maybe look out for some more organic brands.
So I'm here with another consumer. So Crystal, If you had to choose between a genetically modified product and a product that is organic or non-genetically modified, which would you choose?
I don't know. I guess I've never really thought about it, but if I did have the option of choosing genetically modified bread versus non-genetically modified bread, I'd definitely choose the one that was non-genetically modified. Yeah, totally.
Great. Thanks so much for your time today, Crystal and Catherine. We'll let you get back to your grocery shopping. We've learned what the consumers know and don't know about genetically modified foods, and we've illustrated just how unsure consumers are about whether they'd continue to buy the products that they're currently buying, given GMO labeling.
In a US survey, 46% said it was very important to know whether food contains GMO, although 3,000 ingredients require labeling on food packaging currently. The USA Senate overwhelmingly voted against federally mandated GMO labeling in 2013, despite customer advocacy and Barack Obama's 2007 promise to make labeling a priority. Consumers have the right to be heard. An abundance of protests and petitions have occurred across North America, pushing 29 bills in 15 states. Despite this, the government isn't listening. In 2012, California voted against Proposition 37 after Monsanto and other corporations set $46 million in pro-GMO campaigns. Similarly, in 2013, Washington's ballot initiative failed after investment of $22 million United States dollars from corporations. But there's the interesting part. Monsanto and other food corporations disagree with research and claim that consumption of GMO products does not cause harm.
I have a quote from Diane Joy Goodman for you, which catches this situation perfectly. If the confidence is there in the safety of these products, why are there so many objections to labeling? Well, that's food for thought. This concludes our segment on genetically modified foods. We have done our best to inform and enlighten you about this controversial and pressing issue. This is a call to action. Let's increase GMO awareness and fight to have this information available to consumers. With information in hand, consumers can make informed choices.
Thanks so much for spending the evening with us. This is Karel Lambrecht.
And Carolyn Taylor.
And thanks for listening to QCR Radio News tonight.